In your new book, you claim that the criminal justice system is wasting both time and billions of dollars pursuing what you see as victimless lifestyle crimes, and it leaves the system so weary that they can't prosecute real and especially violent crimes. Where do you see that happening? Give us some sense of how
Well,
that
okay,
occurs.
we spend about $11 billion on justice a year. 75% of the cases that go through our courts are minor assaults, minor vandalism, theft under, the prostitution, drugs, a big area. These are incidents that aren't of grave social importance. They're not real breaches of the social order. I mean, they're things that society has to deal with through maybe some mediation setting. But what happens is you get 75% of court time being used up with BS that when we get to, let's say, Robert Picton right now, it's in BC, we don't know how to deal with it.
Serial killer.
The serial killer of all the bodies found on the pig farm. This is going to take years to mount this case, because when we ultimately come to the cases that matter, I believe we are fatigued. We don't have the time, we don't have the ability to deal with it. 3 million crimes a year. We can get them down to 100,000 cases that go forward through the courts, and then we can have efficient justice and hopefully fair justice.
Let's deal with recreational drugs first. I mean,
Sure.
you've been in the vanguard of the
Yeah,
push
yeah, yeah.
for the decriminalization of pot. But you would go further. You don't see any huge problem with decriminalizing other recreational drugs as hard as heroin
Sure.
and cocaine?
Well, first, once we understand the mythology surrounding marijuana, you can then start to see the mythology surrounding other drugs. The bottom line is most people use drugs responsibly. A certain percentage, whether it's marijuana or heroin, start to develop problems. So the state should create safety nets for the people who have problems and let the others who use drugs responsibly enjoy themselves in the same way people enjoy a beer at a bar or a golf game or going to the football game. Recreational activity is indispensable to the human condition, and if you can do it safely without hurting people, that's what leads to fulfillment, I think, in life. Not when the big brother tells you, we want you to enjoy your life through these standardized recreational activities. We tell you what's fun and what's not fun. I think that's just wrong and unhealthy for the human spirit.
Even some of us who are quite liberal on this issue are concerned about kids. I mean, we've seen the neurological studies, we've seen the behaviors towards binge drinking,
Sure.
and worry about the prospect that, if these, especially the harder drugs, were legalized, that young people especially would get hooked and addicted. I mean, what's your response to that concern?
A certain percentage will. People with addictive personalities will have difficulty with drugs, whether you're 15 or whether you're 35. And so once again, I say don't deprive the people who can use it responsibly, because some people have a problem. Don't spoil the party, all right? And the reality is proper education will lead most young people to make the right choices. They make choices based on forbidden fruit syndromes. Oh my God, I can be into heroin and really be in the counterculture in the underground. Let's remove that.
Just say no.
Yeah, well, basically, there's no great allure to a drug
Right.
if it's not in the counterculture. So I would guarantee that most people end up choosing beer, wine, and marijuana.
Now, the other concern you often hear raised in regard to the prospect of decriminalization of harder drugs is that these drugs, heroin and cocaine, are so addictive that, I just have to shoot up once or snort once, and I'm going to want to do it again and again and again, and I'm going to become an addict.
That's largely exaggerated. It's part of the mythology. No drug is that addictive that it'll control your soul taking it once. What happened to all those American soldiers doing smack in Vietnam when they came back? You didn't hear about the junkie population of the United States increasing in an exponential way. It's because once they were out of the horror of Vietnam, they didn't need to shoot up once they're in the United States. I was really surprised growing up watching movies about heroin junkies having horrible withdrawal that they almost died to find out most people withdraw from heroin no worse than a flu, throwing up a bit, slight fever, 3-4 days. I'm not supposed to say these things, right? Because when I say them, it's supposed to be encouraging people to use heroin. I'm not. I think heroin would be a stupid drug to use. It's soporific. It puts you pretty much to sleep. I'm sure there's some pleasure involved, but it's synthetic. I don't recommend it. I'm just saying what the state tells you is largely untrue. Our society will not fall apart because of the availability of these illicit drugs. You will find that most people won't use them, and most people who use them will use them responsibly. And yes, there will be horror stories, no question. But the way our system works is we take the horror story, we put it on the front page of the paper, we extrapolate it, and then we're afraid for our children that they're going to be exposed to this drug on one occasion. It's going to ruin their life. I'm sorry, that just isn't the way it goes down, actually. It's a mythology created to support a multi-billion-dollar war on drugs, which just basically keeps a lot of cops and a lot of lawyers in business.
The world's oldest profession, prostitution.
Yes.
You see that as a victimless crime also?
Well, currently the victim is the prostitute, but oddly enough, we incarcerate or punish the victim. The reason why the prostitute is a victim is she's providing a service that men want, and we're not protecting her. We go back to Picton, and all the prostitutes have been killed.
Yes.
65 prostitutes were killed between 1995 and 2000, only 3 by their pimps, by dangerous psychotic Johns, because we're forcing women to go on in the streets to find their work, because we don't allow them to work in brothels and things like that, and they're exposed to danger. Every day women are being brutalized because we don't really recognize prostitution. It's not legal. We don't actually acknowledge that people use prostitutes. We're in such denial, we're losing our ability to protect women, and that's what it's about. There are no other victims.
Now, this leads to a much larger philosophical position that you put forward, and then you say basically that morality, our sense of, at a particular point in time, what is good or bad, shouldn't be driving law. What should?
Well, morality does drive law. Morality animates law, but only when it comes to core values. We all recognize the sanctity of life,
right.
So we have prohibitions on murder. We recognize the sanctity of property, though some people don't, so we have offenses like theft. When you get into areas of personal moral choices in private settings, we're split. 50-50 on abortion, 50-50 on drug decriminalization, maybe 70-30 on prostitution. I haven't looked at the surveys. You can't legislate morality when there's a large proportion of the population that doesn't accept it. You acquire morality through your own processes of life. It's a subjective response. No one can impose it upon you, so it's a waste of time. So the law should just restrict itself to those core values we all respect and leave other institutions like education, parents, and things like that to educate people on the more controversial moral issues and let people make their choices. You give people the right to make choices, they'll eventually make some good choices. If you tell them what to do, they'll always make bad choices.
The relationship between law and morality, I mean, historically, was that law in some respects was to put a brake on morals breaking down, and that duty and restraint were deemed to be a good thing.
Yes.
For a society. Do we run the risk of lowering the premium on duty
Not at
and
all.
restraint
Not at all.
by...
Law is useless. It really is. We don't even need it in some ways. Good people will be good regardless. Bad people will be bad regardless. So we need it because even in a city of angels, we need rules of the road, right? Because people need to know which direction to go in. So we'll always need law. But if you know it's useless, then you don't rely upon it as a knee-jerk solution to every social problem that comes around. And that's where we're at today. And that's because lawyers and judges and politicians have convinced us we can't take care of our problems. We need some professionals, legal professionals, to tell us how to erase our conflicts. And that's a problem. We should be starting from the predicate that law basically can't achieve anything, so we only use it as a necessary evil when we have to have certain rules of conduct.
Well, which brings us to the next question, because not only are you've got lots of criticism about the system and the criminal code, but you are very scathing about your own profession and lawyers. And one of the things you go after the profession about is a fundamental hypocrisy.
Yes.
That most lawyers, if not most lawyers, lots of lawyers smoke pot. Judges who lock up prostitutes are found to frequent them. And your concern is not just hypocrisy here. You see this as undermining
of course.
The integrity of the legal
We've
system.
always recognized historically that hypocrisy is one of the worst vices. It's like a worm at the core of the apple eating away. If we have a justice system that is replete with hypocrisy, it's going to ruin the system. It's bad for the spirit of the people involved. You're not going to get judges acquiring the wisdom of Solomon or becoming wise jurists when they're engaged in their own moral dilemmas and moral conundrums about what they're doing. And you get a lot of cognitive dissonance, and ultimately you have a system that doesn't achieve anything when we have the dignity of disapproval combined with the pleasure of indulgence. That's a real big problem. You can't indulge and disapprove. You can't suck and blow, the old expression. And that's what we do every day in court. And it actually started to disgust me. I could not imagine how someone could sleep at night sending someone to prison for activities they've engaged in. I would resign from the bench immediately. I would resign from being a Crown attorney. You've got to respect yourself to be able to do good work in the public interest. And I don't think lawyers respect themselves. They see themselves as moral menials, as mercenaries, doing a job. There's no morality in law. We just do what we are instructed by our clients to do.
Plea bargaining. I mean, many see this as an effective mechanism of unclogging the courts, finding a compromise in a situation that might otherwise be difficult to resolve. You see this as a means of often railroading innocent victims, or conversely, allowing the truly guilty to get away, if not scot-free, certainly with far less punishment than they should. How does that happen?
Plea bargaining is one of the worst shams ever perpetrated in justice. Now, we started this interview talking about too many crimes. The result of too many crimes is plea bargaining.
Right.
We have 3 million, we need just 100,000 to deal with. The whole idea of plea bargaining is to process criminals. But the thing is with criminals, you don't want to just process them as a number. You want to deal with a real case. You want to find out what their culpability is and give them a meaningful sentence. The one thing you don't want to do is send 2 legal professionals into a little room. And I've done this all the time. Hey, John, how you doing today? Good coffee, right? What do you think, 2 years on this? 3 years? I think I can probably convince the client. What type of justice is that sort of horse trading? 2 lawyers who really aren't acting in the public interest coming up with what is a deserving punishment. Then going and trying to tell the client to accept the deal because it's the best deal they're going to get. On occasion, innocent people plead guilty. On occasion, guilty people plead guilty to crimes they didn't commit or they get punishments they shouldn't receive. Ultimately, it's not justice. It's in the halls. It's like Lenny Bruce said, in the halls of justice, the only justice is in the halls. And I want the justice in the courtroom. I want it open. I want it transparent. I want to know why individual A got 2 years and why individual B got 4 years. And don't tell me it's because Jane and Johnny sat in a room over coffee and decided what's good for our society. I teach these people.
Could it work if there was more transparency, that if the actual record, take the Carla Homolka?
No, you got to just get rid of it. In the United States, they tried to make it transparent so that whenever it's a plea bargain arrangement, you've got to notify the judge and explain it. Nobody does. They've done empirical studies. Nobody wants to stop the juggernaut. If you pause every time to explain how you're processing a case, we're not going to get to the golf course. And that's what it's about. We want to free up our time. We want to get to the big cases that pay us money. We don't want to deal with the bullshit burglar who's been in the system 5 times. This person is dispensable. You take your 2 years and get out of my office. And that's really the attitude of lawyers with plea bargaining. They use it as a clearinghouse to get rid of the cases they don't like so they can deal with the 1 or 2 cases that bring in money or publicity or that they have a genuine interest in.
You talk about the importance of using the jurisprudence concept of mens rea as the guiding principle of the legal system. The notion that you must be able to establish the intent to do harm, and that can only come out of the perpetrators or the accused mouths. Yet we've got a system. I mean, everyone's seen it on television. I plead the fifth, where those who are accused are allowed to remain mute in our courtrooms. How would changing that change everything in your view?
This is where my views become heresy for the profession. The right to remain silent at trial, to me, is a joke. How can you have a hearing into an event without hearing from the person who probably knows the most? With the exception of cases, whodunit cases, identity, where really you shouldn't talk because they should prove it's you. Once it's proved that it's you, you should contribute to the event. You should be part of it. This was how lawyers monopolized the system, why they control it. In the 19th century, they started asserting the right to remain silent consistently. Once lawyers established their clients could remain mute, lawyers are indispensable. They have to speak. Someone's got to talk if you can remain mute. That's how they infiltrated the system. And I don't like it, because how do you send a jury into a room to decide whether someone intended to kill or intended to maim when you haven't even heard from them? There are adequate precautions to protect people testifying in court. We don't do it. What we do is we let the police put you in a room, put the light on you, say, let's talk, Johnny, now. Let's see if we can clear this up quickly. So we try to get the information in the most vulnerable state, in the worst possible environment, but when you show up in court where it's a public record and everyone's there to watch, suddenly you can sit back and smile. And you know what? It's a big game, because studies show that most juries will convict if you don't take the stand. So just take the stand, tell your story, and hopefully, if we don't have such an adversarial, arrogant system, you're not going to be devastated, ripped apart in cross-examination. That's why people don't want to testify, because it's not about telling your story, it's about ripping apart your story. Who wants to tell a story when it's going to be ripped apart?
Now, I'm sure we have some viewers out there going, right on, that Alan Young is really giving it to the lawyers. But how do your colleagues feel about this kind of analysis? I mean, what's the response from the legal profession?
I've already gotten some response from them that they sort of marginalize and dismiss it as nonsense. But I will tell you, most lawyers I speak to and law students tell me that the book rings true to them. Yeah, maybe a bit over the top. Maybe I'm a bit excessive and hyperbolic in the way I express things, but the frustration with the system that's really permeates this book, everyone feels it. Every day you feel it.
Alan Young, I want to thank you very much for joining me. It's been a real pleasure.
It's my pleasure too. Thank you.